The following episode can be viewed on the YouTube channel Bernie or Bust Television.
Good morning, USA, and welcome to another episode of the Bernie or Bust Show. Here it is, Super Tuesday at last. From CNN Politics, Biden races to lock down moderates with expected endorsements from Klobuchar and Buttigieg. Joe Biden is moving closer to consolidating the support of moderate Democratic voters and donors after a resounding victory in South Carolina and the departure of Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar from the party's presidential race. The former vice president is set up to get a massive bump from both exiting candidates. Buttigieg endorsed Biden on Monday in Dallas, and Klobuchar is set to endorse the veteran Democrat at a rally later in the night with former presidential candidate and ex-Texas Rep. Beto O'Rourke. The question heading into Super Tuesday is whether the former vice president and his growing momentum will be enough to keep pace in the delegate race with Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. He'll also need to stave off former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg, whose ads have blanketed the airwaves and social media apps in Super Tuesday states. Bloomberg could be positioned to be a spoiler for Biden, helping Sanders rack up delegates by dividing moderate voters. 14 states and American Samoa will vote on Tuesday on the biggest day of the Democratic primary, with 34% of the party's pledged delegates up for grabs. Sanders expects a big win in California, the day's biggest prize, as well as in other western and northeastern states. Biden is aiming to build on his advantage with African American voters in southern states like Alabama and North Carolina. The biggest battleground could be Texas, where Biden is campaigning Monday and Sanders is hoping to recreate the Latino-led coalition that led him to victory in Nevada. So what we're seeing after Biden's substantial win in South Carolina, which I tried to explain yesterday, is how much his victory will reshape the political landscape. He has to hit at least 15% in a lot of these states to come out with any chance to stop Bernie. And that's why Mayo, Cheat, and Amy dropped out. The biggest prize is California. If he doesn't get to 15% in California, I think he can kiss his ass goodbye. Here's another article by Eowyn Higgins of Common Dreams. They're desperate to beat Bernie. Amy Klobuchar drops out of 2020 Democratic primary to endorse Biden. Key question. Will Warren eventually do the same for the progressive side to block Biden if it is indeed a two-horse race come Wednesday morning? Now that idea right there, let's just look at that idea for a second. We already know that Elizabeth is being paid by the DNC to block Bernie, so there's no way in hell that she's going to drop out to help Bernie. She's in there to hurt Bernie. Her whole point is to hurt Bernie, and it has been since 2015. But it would be nice if her supporters read this and asked her on Twitter, just saying, hey Elizabeth, when are you going to drop out? But she's made it pretty clear that she doesn't intend to drop out, and it's very clear to anyone who's paying attention why she's not going to drop out. Now we move on to Benjamin Dixon and his discussion of Joe Biden, no we can't, class divisions.
And so when we talk about doing something for the working class, what the Democratic establishment has been furiously doing over the last 10 years or more, if not more, to identify, to designate the working class to being nothing but white people. And so therefore, if we do anything for the working class, we are inherently racist. That's propaganda spin number one from the Democratic Party. What they don't realize, or they don't care to admit, they probably know, but they don't care to admit, is the fact that they themselves have been indoctrinated. They have been indoctrinated with right-wing propaganda that has morphed their minds into thinking anyone who wants to do something for the working class is a radical, is a scary socialist, or anyone who's calling for the government to do something for the working class, we must be lazy. These were some of the sentiments that I got off the ground in South Carolina. That's why I knew. I didn't want to say it, but I knew after 2 days, Friday afternoon, Friday night, Saturday morning, after speaking to people, I knew Bernie was going to lose. Not because they dislike Bernie, because they furiously dislike the idea of helping somebody else. Democrats furiously hate. Establishment Democrats have a visceral reaction to trying to help someone else.
Yeah.
That's why they can get behind a guy like Joe Biden who's promising that I'm not going to do a damn thing for you.
Yeah.
That to them is the war cry. That is the battle cry. That's what they want to go into battle against the most destructive president in our history, in at least modern history. They want to go into battle against Donald Trump with the enthusiasm that is garnered by the idea of no, we can't. But they're willing to do that because it's an anathema to them. It is repugnant to them to think about doing something for the working class.
Yeah.
And so the greatest example of the Republican propaganda, the greatest accomplishment of Republican propaganda was to turn Democrats into Republicans. That is what has happened.
Yep.
Democrats who believe that there's something different than Republicans, no, all you've done is turn your hatred towards somebody else.
Yep.
This system is built off of who you hate.
Yep.
Republicans just hate everybody who's not white, basically. They hate everybody who does not believe what Donald Trump tells them to believe. I ran into people like that too. It was such an experience in South Carolina that I got to write a book about it, or at least a chapter in the book that I'm working on. Like, I ran into a guy who was a multi-millionaire, furious. I mean, had everything that he needed, ever wanted, but his hatred towards everybody who did not support Donald Trump was unimaginable. And I guess hatred is the wrong word, because we had a good conversation and it was a pleasant conversation, but the rage that was underneath the surface, you would think that he was full of rage because he was struggling. No, he was full of rage because of the idea that we would demand this government do something for the people.
Yes.
That infuriated him so much to the point where I had to make sure I was ready to jump. If it was going to jump off, I had to be ready, right? I just had to, I kind of gauge the environment. I'm a small dude, so I always got to be ready to, in case stuff goes down, I got to be able to maneuver pretty quickly, grab something next to me because I'm a small dude. And that's how much rage came out of him every few seconds. But guess who was almost as furious as he was? This black elderly guy who was at the diner that we were in recording MSNBC. He pulled me to the side, and here I am getting ready to engage in a conversation with my African-American elder and just kind of banter back and forth. And this dude was ready to fight me because I supported Bernie Sanders. And it wasn't because of Bernie Sanders as a person. It was because he was furious that people would demand that this government do something for the people.
Yeah. So if you're trying to vote for Joe Biden, if you're an elderly black person or an elderly white person or an elderly purple person, and you can in good conscience vote for Joe Biden, you have a furious desire not to help working class people. Let's just call it what it is. Now we're going to point out some other weaknesses in Joe Biden besides the fact that he doesn't want to help working class people.
And frankly, you're at a big disadvantage going into there. Let me count the ways. You haven't held a rally in a Super Tuesday state in more than a month. In California, Bernie Sanders has 23 offices and more than 100 staffers. You have one office, and your campaign won't say how many staffers. And while Sanders is spending $13.5 million on TV ads for Tuesday, you started running your first ad this week. Question, if you get clobbered on Super Tuesday, what does that do to your campaign?
Well, it certainly doesn't help, but there's a lot of big states coming up after that. Florida and Georgia and Pennsylvania and Michigan. I mean, a whole range of states that still are in play. But I don't, look, I'm not a pundit, Chris, and I'm not being a wise guy. I mean, I'm being deadly earnest. I feel good about where we are. And I think ultimately people are now beginning to focus on the opposition and the way that they focused on in the Democratic Party, the way they've been focusing on me for a long time. And
Is Bernie the opposition then, Joe? Bernie's the bad guy. Well, that's pretty clear to most of us who are watching you.
I think it's about the message, and I think that people know who I am.
It's about the message. Like we should cut Social Security. All these boomers think that you're going to save them from Donald Trump. I don't know how they could think that. It's going to be even more obvious in the next few minutes of this show that you're not going to save us from anybody. The oligarchs are pinning all their hopes on you in hopes that you're going to save their money. And that's why you're in it, Joe. And that's why Elizabeth is in it. And that's why Mayor Cheat was in it. And Amy was in it. And Beto and Kamala and Corey. They're all trying to save us from the rage of the donors that the working class people ought to be able to get any kind of help from their government. We the people. And you're standing directly in the way, Joe.
Mr. Vice President, I don't especially like asking you about this, but it is an issue in the campaign, and that has been your sometimes shaky performance on the campaign trail. Here's a story that you told at least 3 times about Nelson Mandela. Take a look.
I had the great honor of meeting him. I had the great honor of being arrested with our UN ambassador on the streets of Soweto trying to get to see him on Robbins Island.
You now say you weren't arrested and it didn't happen in Soweto. You were at the airport in Johannesburg and you were stopped from going through the door for blacks. I guess the question is, were you confused or were you just trying to embellish a story?
No, what I was doing was talking about the fact that I was strongly opposed to apartheid. When we landed we were going to Soweto, actually. We landed in Johannesburg, and the Afrikaners took me off the plane and took me in one direction, wanted me to go through a white-only door, and in fact, I wouldn't move. I said, everybody else is going through another door. I'm going with the black delegation that I came with. They said, no, you can't. And I said, well, I'm standing here. I'm not going to move, and they would not let me move anywhere. So I guess I should have said I was detained. I was not able to move forward. So what they finally did was they went out and.
I guess I should have said I was detained when what you actually said was I was arrested. But whatever.
They cleared out a baggage claim area, took us all up through the baggage claim area up and cleared out a restaurant. Look, and if anybody wonders whether or not what I said about my desire and my adamancy about apartheid, you've covered it. Go back and look at.
That's not what we were talking about. We were talking about you misrepresenting the facts.
JoeBiden.com and take a look at what's happened in the.
Your record is clear.
Anyway.
Let me ask you, though, here's something else you said this week. Take a look.
I'm a Democratic candidate for the United States Senate. Look me over. If you like what you see, help out. If not, vote for the other guy. Give me a look, though, okay?
You haven't run for the Senate since 2008. What happened there?
No,
The context. Okay, so then he made a kind of reasonable argument. I'll let you watch it. I want to be fair here.
The context was, I said to everybody, I said, look, I'm going to say the same thing that I've always said. Like I used to campaign in Delaware. I'd say, I'd knock on the door. I'd say, my name is Joe Biden, Democratic candidate for the United States Senate. Look me over. If you like me, help me out. If not, vote for the other guy. That's a sentence I repeated throughout making the case. And I said, and I'm here now to ask you all to look me over. It was in the context of how I said I ran, because the context also was that, as was pointed out by Cedric and others of my campaign and how I ran when I ran for the Senate, was people will not, they expect you to ask them. You have to earn their vote. That was the context of that.
All right. Final question in this regard. President Trump went after you about this at CPAC yesterday. Take a look at what he said.
I'll show you that one.
Now, Sleepy Joe would say the unemployment rate in the great state of Ohio. No, you're in South Carolina. Joe, you're in South. They come up and you ever see the guy that no, it's South Carolina. It's not Ohio. Okay. Then he goes, all right, Iowa. Did you say Iowa? No. I did that like 7 times. If I did that once, it would be the end of the road, right? Be the end of the road. They'd say Trump has lost it. They like to say that anyway, I guess. These people are bad people. Oh, Sleepy Joe. Well, he's running tomorrow. No, but could you imagine if I said just a small fraction of the mistakes he makes, which are unbelievable, every speech? I actually said the other night, I was watching him when he said about half the population wiped out with guns. I said, that's a horrible thing. That's the end of his evening. That's the end of his political career. And then after the debate, they're reviewing him. They said, Joe Biden had a great night last night. I don't get it, Tim.
If you look at Trump and you look at Bernie and you look at Joe, Trump and Bernie are a lot sharper than Joe. We should also say that if he is the nominee and then he is debating Donald Trump, these are the kinds of things that Donald Trump will throw at him later.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. A historic moment today in the world of politics. After much trial and error and a great deal of anxiety and frustrated harumphing on cable news panels, the Democratic establishment tonight finally has chosen a candidate to stop Bernie Sanders before he can take their money. There's much relief in Washington right now. The Sanders threat is imminent and profound, and they've been sweating it. Imagine General Chinese Gordon surrounded by screaming Mahdi's at the siege of Khartoum, and you will know how they feel. Terrified. It's one thing if your country falls apart, if 10th graders can't read and 9-year-olds are taking puberty-blocking drugs and downtown LA looks like Calcutta and another 10,000 more Americans just died of fentanyl overdose, whatever. Americans are dying. Democrats are fine with that. They can live with it. They do. They don't say a word. But if there's a rogue candidate out there who might actually be serious about closing the carried interest loophole, enforcing private equity barons to pay the same effective tax rate that you do, well, that cannot stand. It's totally and completely unacceptable. In fact, it's morally wrong. Alert the panel on Morning Joe, we're going to war. And tonight they have found their warhorse, a hero they imagine will carry them forth to victory against the wild-haired infidel from Vermont. This is the man they believe has the competence, the intensity, the intellect to repel the seething horde of Sandersites. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Joe Biden.
Look, tomorrow's Super Tuesday, and I want to thank you all. I tell you what, I'm rushing ahead, aren't I? 150 million people have been killed since 2007 when Bernie voted to exempt the gun manufacturers from liability. It would put 720 million women back in the workforce. Nobody should be in jail for a nonviolent crime. My name's Joe Biden. I'm a Democratic candidate for the United States Senate. What's not to like about Vermont in terms of the beauty of it? And what a neat town. Play the radio. Make sure the television, make sure you have the record player on at night. Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids. We choose science over fiction. We choose truth over facts. Think about it. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by you know the thing.
Yep, that's the man. It's Super Thursday, and he's running for the United States Senate in memory of the nearly half the country that's murdered by guns in the last few years, guided by the belief that other children are as bright and talented as white kids, not to mention clean and articulate. And in the hope that he can put 750 million women back to work, whether they want to go or not. If that's the kind of transformational candidate you're looking for, Joe Biden is your man. Or if you're looking for someone to get you a second serving of Jell-O from the 4:30 early bird buffet, Biden could do that too. He's a Renaissance man. Though as he himself would tell you, the Renaissance was an awful long time ago, back during the Carter administration, actually. And you know what? Jimmy was a good guy, better than they said, and so on. Honestly, and how do you say this without being rude or mean, this whole thing is sad. Worse than that, it's cruel. Running Joe Biden for president is like making your dog wear a dress. It may make for an amusing Instagram post, but it's wrong. You can see the confusion in the dog's eyes. You can see the same thing in Joe Biden's eyes if you look closely.
So that's what we're up against. It gives me no pleasure to do it, but I do it because I know that Joe Biden's policies are terrible. I know that he doesn't give a damn about working class people, and he hasn't ever. It is sad, but the saddest part to me is that affluent Democrats are backing him. The kinds of liberals who don't want your kids going to school with their kids. If we're going to splain anything, it needs to be this. Whether Joe was a viable candidate against Trump ever, the fact remains that Bernie or bust, combined with the Bernie or Trump voters in swing states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, make sure that you'll never get Joe into the White House. And that probably is fine with some of the people. A lot of people on the inside say our money is going to stop flowing if we have Bernie as president. But for regular, suburban, comfortable Democrats, the reason that you would vote for Joe Biden is because you want to keep your own gig flow going. And you do have a visceral reaction to helping others, whether or not you want to admit it, whether or not you are engaging in woke signaling. It doesn't matter. If you want to put your money where your mouth is, you'll put your money on Bernie Sanders, who has policies to actually help working class people. And if you don't, you suck. And if you don't, we're not going to allow it. We're not going to allow Joe Biden to win against Donald Trump. We'll stay home, we'll vote third party, we'll do what we need to do. Yes, we'll sabotage Joe Biden. Absolutely. You can bank on it. We're not going to blink first. And even if you can talk some of us into voting for Biden against Trump, there are enough Bernie or Trump voters who aren't going to hear it. And you know, right now, on Super Tuesday, you know going in that we'll never bend, that we'll never break, we'll never allow Biden to win the presidency. And you know it right now. So if you don't unite behind Bernie and Bernie doesn't get a majority, and then all kinds of hell breaks loose in Milwaukee, you'll be to blame. And I'll remind you, if you're still on the fence about Bernie or bust, wait until tomorrow and see what you think. We'll see what happens in California especially. And if anything happens that pisses you off past the point of no return, remember BernieOrBust2020.us. Take the pledge, and while you're at it, make a reservation for a place to stay in Milwaukee near the convention center, and we'll see you there as we demand together that Bernie Sanders is the nominee for the Democratic Party. Get on board the Bernie or Bust train. Come get on board the Bernie or Bust train. Once you hear that clickety-clack, there ain't no time for turning back. Oh, get on board the Bernie or Bust train.
The preceding episode can be viewed on the YouTube channel Bernie or Bust Television.